Now, building apps, especially complex ones, can be a very, very daunting process. If the app has a lot of things happening, if there's a lot of things going on, it could be a little bit overwhelming in terms of where you can start in order to build the same app, because there's a lot of moving pieces. And at times you can be a little confused as to how do I start from the right point in order to do this correctly. And so in today's video, I'm going to be sharing with you my 5-step proven process for building just about any kind of app out there. It does not matter if this is a very, very simple one-page app, or this is a more complex app that has tens of different pages, or this is a production app that's out there in the wild right now that's being used by millions of people, or it has some special logic. This process is applicable to any app out there, and especially it's going to be useful for you if you want to clone that app using one of the no-code tools. So regardless whether you're looking to build an app from scratch or you're looking to clone an existing app using pretty much any kind of no-code tool, and it doesn't really matter what no-code tool you're going to be using, all you have to do is follow this method and you will be able to build the app that you want to build. Now, the first thing that you want to do when you're starting to build out a new app is that you do not want to code anything, okay? This is the part where you're trying to figure out what the app does at a very, very high level. And there are two important things to keep in mind here. The first thing that you want to keep in mind is the flow of the app. Okay, now we're not looking to build any app. We're not thinking about logic here. We're not thinking about databases here. We're not thinking about, what kind of storage we're going to be using. We are just thinking about the different parts of the app. This is very, very high level. So as an example, let's say I'm building a dating app, and it doesn't really matter what kind of app I'm building. I always approach it the same exact way. I start thinking about the different pages the app might have, okay? That is the first part. Now, the second thing that you want to be thinking about, and this is crucial, is that you want to isolate what is it that makes the app special? What is so unique about this app? Because if you think about, regardless what kind of app you're thinking about, whether it's a dating app or eBay clone or Uber app or something else, a marketplace, maybe a currency conversion or a crypto wallet, it doesn't really matter. There's something, at least one thing that's like very, very unique about this app, and you want to kind of figure out how it works. And I like to call this the engine of the app. So if we take a look at an app like a dating app, okay, so maybe you're building a no-code dating app, right? This is going to be a dating app for people that are interested in no-code, okay? And let's say you're modeling it on Tinder, okay? Well, if you think about Tinder, right, Tinder has something that I like to call an engine. There's something unique about Tinder, and this is not the login part, this is not the authentication part, this is not, filling out a profile or anything like that. This is the part where the matching is done, okay? And so here I have a small diagram that I like to do at the initial stages of building this app, okay? This is kind of the engine that I like to build, and this is one of the first things that I do when I go out and build an app. I want to isolate this engine, and you can call it an engine. You can also call it a unique value proposition, because from a marketing standpoint, this is what makes the app unique and interesting, but also from a developer's standpoint, this is something that you will have to code, okay? So there are kind of two sides of the same coin. There's the part where you'll have to code, and you'll probably need to spend a good amount of time figuring out how this works. And there is also the marketing angle, because this is going to be the main part of the app that people are going to be using it for, right? If you think about Tinder, their engine, their unique value proposition is that unique matching where you are swiping left or right, and depending on how you do it, the app matches, right? So if you swipe right, it records that you were interested in this person, And then if the same, if the person does the same thing, you're going to have a match. That is what makes Tinder unique. I just described it in one sentence, and that is what you have to think about. And so not only do you have to do this in the first step, kind of figure out the scope of the app real quick, but you also have to spend time on this kind of the engine of the app that I like to call it. Another really good example is if you're building like an auction marketplace, so something like eBay, right? You have an eBay app flow, and there's also an engine at play there, right? There's kind of a bidding engine, and they call it automatic bidding. And the way it works is that you are bidding, but you only will be able to outbid someone if you've outbid it, if you bid more than their highest bid. And you don't know what that highest bid is because it's a secret bid. And so if you've bid more, you're only going to be able to outbid that bid, that last bid, just by a little bit, just by that minimum amount. So if the highest bid is, let's say 50, and you bid 100, the new bid is going to be like 55 or 52.5, depending on how they calculate it. It's not going to be 100. And so that is kind of eBay's engine, right? From a bidder's perspective, okay? So from a consumer perspective. And so I have here a small diagram that I will design if I'm building that kind of an app. So you have to keep in mind, if you're building a social networking app, okay, so what is that unique proposition when it comes to building like maybe an Instagram clone or a Twitter clone? Well, that is following someone and then reading their content, okay? So if I'm following, 3 people, I'm going to be seeing their updates. I'm not going to be seeing updates from everybody, okay? Because that's really, really easy to do. You just basically show everybody's content. But the engine, that unique value proposition, is I'm only going to be seeing content from people that I follow. And so when you're thinking about the app that you're going to be building, you're going to be thinking about the engine. You're going to be thinking about the core of the app, okay? What makes this app unique? And this is going to be especially true when it comes to super successful apps like Uber, Uber Eats, delivery apps, when you think about marketplace apps, when you think about like auction apps, when you think about social media apps, dating apps, they're always going to have something like a core or an engine or a unique value proposition that you will have to model and figure out how to do it. Now, once you've done that, you've completed the step 1 of the process and you are ready to move to step 2. In step 2, you're going to be focusing on the UI, okay? We're always starting from the UI, okay? The UI is the key. The user does not care whether you're using Firestore DB or you're using real-time DB or you're using MongoDB or, SQL, NoSQL. They don't really care. All they care is whether the app that you are showing them, whether the app that they're using is easy to use and does what they wanted to do. They're buying an app as a utility. They're using the app as a utility. That's kind of the key that you want to think about. And so at this stage of the game, you want to create the flow of the app. And so you want to be asking yourself, is this going to be a single page app or is this going to be a multiple page app? And if so, how many pages is it going to have? Because there's lots of amazing single page apps, something like a currency converter, maybe some kind of a conversion app, a utility app. But there are also apps that have, 3-4 pages, apps that have 15 pages. And so you want to be thinking about that. And this is also a stage where you're going to be architecting things. And now at this stage of the game, I like to make an architectural diagram of the pages that we're going to be showing the user and how they're going to be interacting with each other. And so as an example, let's say we are building an online learning platform. Okay, this is your classical CRUD app. Okay, so what this means is that we're going to have a list of categories. When they click on one category from this list, they're going to have a list of courses, and this is going to be a one-to-many relationship. Okay, one category is going to have many courses, and they click on a course, they're going to see many lessons. So one-to-many relationship again, and then they're going to see a list of lessons, and they're going to click on a lesson, and finally they get to the detail view. So if you think about it, these are all list views here, and then here is a detail view. Okay, so this is a simple example. You might have another example where you're building some kind of a car rental marketplace. So you have cars offers, you have a car detail, and so you have a list, you have a detail, a one-to-many relationship. And then on this stage, right, you're not showing them details, you have some kind of an action. And so unlike the previous example where they're kind of like picking from a list, they're going to a detail, they're kind of browsing a one-to-many relationship, there's also a call to action. So like a CTA, okay? So in this case, it's book, it could be like call, it could be email, it could be do something. Because we want the user to take an action. And so, you can also have like a list of favorites, you can favorite something. And remember, we are not thinking about code just yet. We're thinking about features. We're thinking about our user, putting myself into the user's shoes, and I'm asking myself, what kind of features can I deploy on my app that's gonna help the user get from point A to point B. So I can include list of offers, list of details, and I can get them to book. But maybe they're not ready to book yet. Okay, maybe they're just casually browsing. Maybe they're window shopping. Okay, they're not ready to book yet. In this case, I'm thinking about favorites. Okay, I'm thinking about, listen, save it, and so that they can get back to it later. Okay, so in this case, favorite could be a good idea as well, right? So we have kind of a direct action flow, and we also have the favorite, right? So they can favorite it instead of like, opening up their wallets and actually purchasing something, and then they can use that favorite list to go out and buy it. So that is kind of what I'm thinking, and obviously this is going to depend on what you're doing. Here you have another diagram for an app that I'm building as well, and we have different flows. We have the developer flow, customer flow, and then you have kind of the other view, the seller's dashboard as well. So there's different things happening, and I'm asking myself, okay, what is the user going to be doing? I'm basically putting myself in the user's shoes, and I'm trying to figure out what is the best experience I can deliver to the user. Now, after I've completed kind of the architectural diagrams, I know the core of the app, I know, the flows of the app. I know what kind of features I'm going to be including in order to make my app a delight, a joy to use. I will finally, for the first time in this process, I will log into my NoCode tool of choice. In this case, we have FlutterFlow, but it doesn't really matter what NoCode tool you use. It just needs to be designed for the kind of app that you're building. And so in this case, let's say I have like 4 pages I need to build. Maybe this is your typical CRUD app. Maybe there's a list of something else, maybe another list, and finally a detail page. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create my 4 pages. I'm just going to duplicate this. And so you will just duplicate it like this, and then maybe rename this. So I will say this is like, home page 2, or I will say page 3, page 4. Okay, and maybe this is page 2. Okay, so I have like a home page, page 2, page 3, page 4. Now, if this app needs authentication, login, authorization, stuff like that, I will do that as well. I'm just not thinking about that here because the process for doing that is all the same. I mean, you essentially configure this to support logins, authentication, and then you come in here and you need to create a new login page. Okay, this is going to depend on the no-code tool that you're using. Once I have the pages here, I will also start building out the app. So, if I have a home page, and let's say I know on the home page I'm going to have a list view, I'm just going to come here. I'm going to go to my element tree here, and let's say I have, a root element, a column in this case. I'm just going to go in here and maybe input a list view. And inside the list view, maybe I'm going to have some elements. I'm going to pick an element that I'm going to be using, populating with data. Maybe it's going to be something like this in this case. Now, after I've duplicated all the pages, and for each page, I inserted the proper elements, I did my alignments. The app does not have the right data. It's not, it doesn't have any logic, but at least I have a general understanding, a general idea of the scope of the app. And this is very, very important because a lot of people, they get bogged down in the development, in the features. They basically blow up the scope, and they end up having an app that they will never finish because they keep adding new features. And the secret here is that you want to kind of limit the scope early on. You want to scope the app out early on. You want to make sure that when you are actually developing the app, you have a scope that you've already defined. And so at the end of the step, I would have essentially limited the scope. I will know at this point, what the user is going to be interacting with. And obviously in some of the next steps, when I'm going to be building the logic stuff, I'm not going to be building the logic stuff for pages and UI elements that the user will never see. And this is great because essentially it gives me a peace of mind that I know, okay, look, I have 4 pages. It's going to have a bunch of elements. That's all I need to do. I just got to make it work. Okay, now I just kind of need to wire it up and connect it and all these things. But at least it's not going to have, 20 other pages or even 5 other pages. And so by the end of this step, you're also going to experience a sense of psychological relief because you will know that you have, let's say, 4 pages, and now you just got to make it work. And it's not rocket science to build the logic and, wire it up with data for all of these 4 pages. And once you're done here, you are ready to move to step 3. Now, after you've designed the diagram, you have the UI, you kind of scoped it out. You also went into your NoCode tool of choice. You created the necessary pages. You've also added the necessary elements. You've essentially gave the app the look and feel. And at this stage, you are ready to start wiring up your app. And in this process here, what you're essentially going to be doing is you're going to be adding logic to the app. Because if you think about, if you don't have any logic, all you have is just a list of static pages. And so let's say you have, maybe you have a button here. So let's say you have a button here, and let's say I come in here to this row and I add a button. Well, you might have a button here, but that button is not doing anything. And so in this stage of the game, you need to be thinking, okay, what is this button going to be doing? Is this button going to be doing navigation? So in other words, if I click on this button, do we want the user to go to another page? Do we want the user to go to the next page? Is this a kind of app where it's sequential? Okay, so if this is page 1, home page, and I click on this, do we want the user to go to the second page? Okay, so what you're thinking about is things that will make your app essentially a piece of software. So for instance, if I select this button, I can wire it up with an action. So let's say I'm doing navigation, I will say navigate to page 2. Okay, so now that button at least has a purpose. It's not just sitting there and not doing anything. And there's going to be several types of logic that your app is going to do. Your app is going to be moving forward. Your app might be also moving backwards. So maybe you're going to have a page 2, and when you come in here, you're going to have this kind of app bar where you're going to have a back button, right? So you're going to click here, and you have an icon button here, and this thing is going to be, navigating back. So I'm going to say navigate back. Okay, so not only are you going to have, navigation forward, but you're also going to have navigation backward if that's the kind of app that you're building. But the other thing that you will need to do is your app needs to be also reactive. So what I mean by that is, let's say you have, you have a column here. And so let's say you have this text right here, and let's say it's, I don't know, all the way on top there. Now this text can display static string. It can actually pull something from a database, or it can react to changes. So maybe you click something here, you change something here, and this thing is going to be changing. So there's going to be different things happening, okay, when it comes to logic. You might click on something, it might display a message, you might change this, you might change that. And so this is the part where you need to be thinking on several levels. Not only are we thinking about like simple stuff, right? Like navigation, which is like the basics, okay? Obviously, if you're going to have 4 pages, you're going to have navigation between those pages, but you also need to be thinking about situations at a higher level. So as an example, if there is something happening with the app, so if the user clicks on something, do I want to show the results on a different page, or do I want to show results on the same page? If you want to show results on the same page, and in many situations that is preferred because you're not refreshing the same page, you're not redirecting the user to another page. That way the user does not need to wait, right? So if I click on this button, I see the result right here instead of me redirecting to the next page just to see that result. So if you can't keep the user on the same page in order to show them something that's happening, that is the preferred method. And if you're going to be doing that, then you need to think about how can you make your app behave in a reactive way. Okay, so obviously depending on the tool that you're going to be using, that's going to work in different ways. With FlutterFlow, there are ways of making your app reactive. With Bubble, there are ways of making your app reactive. With other tools, there are also ways using, with appgyver, there are ways of making your app reactive. And so when you think about the logic, logic is like a ladder, right? There's simple logic that's essentially when you're navigating the app. There's also situations where you have more complex logic where you need to calculate something, do some work, and then display the result, display the answer on the same page. And the way your app will behave, the way it's going to do all that logic will depend on the rules, on the business logic. So the business logic is essentially from a user's perspective. Okay, what does the user want to see? Obviously, if I'm using some kind of a crypto wallet or a currency conversion app, I don't want to, if I want to convert something, I don't want the app to navigate. I want it to stay on the same page. So when you are designing the app in the initial stages, you will at least at that point have a certain understanding, have a certain idea of how you want the app to behave. Okay, is this going to be just regular, navigation? Is this going to be a reactive app that's going to be changing stuff? And in this step, you're going to be implementing all of that. You're going to be, wiring up all of these components, whether they're going to be reactively changing based on some events, or you're essentially going to be redirecting to a new page that's going to be doing the calculations. And with experience, you will have a sixth sense, and you will understand some of the different types of logics that you will eventually need to implement in this step, even before you start and actually building the app. So it never hurts to start thinking about these things in the initial stages of the app. Once you've done wiring up all the app, all the logic stuff, you are ready to move to step 4. Okay, so now you have an architectural diagram of the app. You understand the core of the app. You understand the main selling point of the app that we talked about in the initial parts of this video. You also understand the UI. You've scoped the app out. You know the number of pages your app is going to have. You also built the UI elements, and you've also wired up the app. Now, in this step, you will need to be thinking about how you're actually going to be storing the data for the app. Now, in these kinds of apps, you will typically have two types of data that you will be handling. The first type of data is the so-called app state or local state. And this is data that essentially is temporary, okay? It's basically being transformed, it's being manipulated throughout the time that the user is using the app. So from the time the user loads up your app on their device, whether it's on their laptop computer, on their tablet, or on their mobile device, we are essentially loading up that data. And so while they're using the app, they are going to be manipulating that data. Now, some of this data we will have to store for future. So maybe they've done some calculation in the app and they need to save that data so that when they reload the app, they have that old data that they can keep using. But there are also situations where a lot of that data we don't really care about. right? So they did a calculation, they got the result, but they don't really care about the data that was used to do the actual calculation in the first place. All of that is app data. And so in this step, you want to be thinking about what kind of data are we going to be dealing with? Are we going to have a lot of app state data? Is this going to be an app where we're going to be doing a lot of calculations and only saving the results? Now, the second type of data that you're going to be concerning yourself with is going to be the more permanent data, okay? And this is going to be the data that you're going to load up from some third-party storage. And while the user is using the app, you might be reading and writing that data. And after the user is finished, you may write some of that data back to this permanent storage. Now, depending on the type of app you're going to be building, you're going to have a different proportion of the app state and more permanent storage. So as an example, let's say you are building an auction-based app, so something like an eBay type app. You're going to have a lot of permanent data that you're going to be working with, right? All of these things, they're going to be displaying permanent data. So if we have the home page, that is going to be your permanent data. Item page, detailed view, that is going to be your permanent data, right? Profile, purchases, all of that is permanent data. Now, let's say you're building something like a currency conversion app. So we have the list of different currencies. We have their relation to each other. We have the current rates that was downloaded today or maybe last hour. All of that is permanent data, but the temporary data, maybe the app state, could be users' input. So if they enter, they need to convert, let's say $50 into a bunch of other currencies. That is app state. We might not care to save that data so that the user can see that tomorrow. They only care about it today. Maybe the user is in a different country and they are wondering how much money they need to withdraw from an ATM so that they have X amount in this specific currency. And so today they care about $50. Tomorrow they might not care about that $50. That is a perfect example of app state. Another really good example of app state is user input on an app. And so let's say we have this app homepage here. And let's say we are taking user input. So we're going to have a text field. And let's say we have this text field right here. And we need to get a user to input something so that we need to display something. So a perfect example is a translation app. Okay, so let's say you need to translate from English to Spanish. And so that input there where they enter some text in English, and we need to translate that to Spanish, this is going to be app state, okay? This is not that important for us to store somewhere for next time, okay? It's absolutely fine that this data has a lifetime that lasts for the life of the app. So, the user loads the app, they enter some text, we translate it, they read it out loud, maybe they copy it, they paste it somewhere else, and they're done. They close the app. And so they don't really care if they're going to see that same text, that same translation the next time they load the app. It's the exact same situation with currency conversion. They need something right now. They need to input something. We need to do the logic. We need to convert it. We need to give them the answer. But the next day or even later that day, they might have a new value they want to enter, whether it's some text to translate or a currency conversion. And so when you're building apps, you might have an app that leans heavily on app state. Okay, these are your utility apps, your translation apps, maybe voice recognition, maybe text to speech, speech to text, image recognition, stuff like that. But you might also be building apps that lean heavily on permanent data. And these are all the apps that we talked about before, maybe like a more complex app, an eBay clone app, a dating app, a car rental app, a marketplace app, stuff like that. And so now that you realize what kind of data is going to be temporary, meaning your app state, what kind of data is going to be more permanent, you are ready to wire up all of these widgets that you've defined in the previous steps to the actual data. And so here in FlutterFlow, you can go to this local state and you can define the local state that you're going to be manipulating. And you can also come to Firestore and you can define your schema that's going to be tied to your Firestore DB in the backend. And then you can go back to the UI and you can say, well, let's say this is actually, set from my local state, or maybe this is set from a local state. And I can go to a local state and I can set it to a specific value. Or let's say this is a list and it needs a backend query. So I can come in here and I can do my query collection, and I can add my collection and I can do the appropriate query. Now, I personally tend to spend a lot of time in this step because at the end of the day, your app isn't just the logic that's doing something, but it's the logic that's manipulating the app state. So if you think about the end result of the app, that app that you want to build, that you've been dreaming to build, it's really a function of the logic doing something with all the data. And so, yes, defining the logic is very, very important, but defining the logic is relatively straightforward. It's figuring out how you're actually be representing the data. Is this going to be a list of objects? Is this going to be a bunch of lists? Is this going to be simple data? Is this going to be a collection, sub-collection, a sub-collection, sub-collection? This is very, very important. And so my most important tip for you is that you want to design your data in a way that when you're actually pulling up that data with logic and displaying it in the UI, displaying it for the user, you want to make sure that you can display all that data in the simplest and a no hassle way possible. And so if you can design your data using very, very simple means, simple ways, it's a lot better than a lot of these complicated data structures. And once you've designed your data, you have your local app state, you have your more permanent storage, you've connected the data to these widgets, you now have ways of actually displaying that data, reacting to different changes. You are ready to move to the last step. Now at this stage, you have done almost everything that you need in order to have a functioning app. You've designed the app, you figured out the core feature, the core element of the app, the engine of the app, and you also have been able to translate it into code or in a way that fits in with your NoCode tool of choice. And you've also wired up these components to logic, so they're actually doing something instead of staring back at you. And last but not least, you also have the data. You figured out your app state, you figured out your more permanent storage. Things are looking really, really good. At this point, what you need to do is you need to build a quick and dirty prototype. And I call this version 0.001. This is not version 1.0 because it's going to be missing a lot of things that you wanted to do. And this version can also have various bugs, meaning that it might react in some unexpected ways under certain situations. All of that is perfectly okay. Now, what's important here is that you have something that at least includes all the pages, all the elements that you wanted to include. It also includes that core part of the app, that engine that you need in order to give the app its meaning, and plus the app is displaying all the right data. And at this point, you should not have any errors. You should be seeing a green check mark in a tool such as FlutterFlow. And what this means is that you don't have any issues, everything is fine, you can go ahead and compile the app. And it's of crucial importance that you be able to build out a prototype very, very quickly. And this is where a lot of people get stuck. They keep building the app, they keep piling up new feature after feature, and they have a ton of errors. And when they try to fix the errors in order to kind of test out the app, have a quick prototype, they can't quite get it to work for various reasons. So this is very, very important. When I'm developing my apps, I want to have a prototype ASAP. I want to look at my app in the wild. I want to actually see this app working ASAP before I start optimizing the app, adding new features, fixing the UI, fixing the font color, the font size, stuff like that. And really, even though you've done a lot in the previous steps, having a workable prototype, a prototype that you can actually kind of use, even though it's not perfect by any means, means that you've overcome a lot. And depending on the scope of the app, if you're building a very, very simple app or you're building a very, very complex app, you will have multiple of these prototypes, and each of these prototypes will get you closer to the final version of the app. And this is where I want to share with you the 6th bonus step. Once you have your initial prototype, I can also happily say that things will get easier from there. You've taken an idea, you've done all the steps, you now have a functioning app, and in this stage, all you need to do is iterate, essentially by repeating the whole process over and over again until you get to a point that you have an app with all the features and the functionalities that you set out to build in the first place. And this might mean repeating one or all of the previous steps that I talked about in this video. But rest assured, I can safely say that things will get a lot easier with each subsequent iteration. And so if you follow these steps on your next project, I'm very sure you will be able to build the app that you want quickly and effectively. Now, if you are committed to NoCode for 2023 and you are ready to take your NoCode knowledge to the next level and you are ready to build the apps that you always wanted to build, then you definitely need to check out my Patreon page. On my Patreon page, you will find a lot of extra content. Not only will you be able to view and clone all my FlutterFlow apps as well as all of these other apps, but you also get access to extra content such as Q&As, live streams, behind the scenes content, and my series of masterclasses where I go in depth into specific areas of NoCode that a lot of people are struggling with. And plus, by joining my Patreon, you will be able to support this channel and support my work. We have an awesome community of users there. And so if you haven't yet joined, I really hope to see you there. And so I really hope you've gotten value from this video. If you did, give this video a fat like, leave a comment below with questions or comments, subscribe to this channel if you haven't yet done so, and I will see you in a future video.